Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on Erev Shabbos Friday? Yehudit saying Shabbat Shalom, dear Nina Salin, everyone from Florence, South Carolina. Paul in the Great Northwest, Gordo in Scotland, Sharon in New Jersey, Bella in Florida, Bill in mid-Missouri, Renee in Indiana, Randy in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Guy in Ohio, Marjorie in Georgia, reminding us that this is Shabbos Para. So we have special Shabboses leading up to Passover, to Pesach, when we have special readings in the Haftorah. So we'll be reading, I assume it's about the Para Aduma, about the red heifer, and that couldn't be more timely since that comes up in our daf today. Also, Guy in Ohio, and wow, Sharon reminding us today is 1 year. Evan Gerskovich is imprisoned in Russia. May he be freed today, speedily and soon. We say amen. Obviously, as well as the hostages, never off our minds. And let's dedicate our learning today so that all our brothers and sisters in captivity may be released and go from darkness to light, from captivity to freedom, from constriction to liberty today. Say amen. All right. Let's do this. Our daf today, right, is page 30. Yes, page 30. Daf Lamed here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. We're continuing our journey through chapter 2, and specifically Mishna number 10 that we opened yesterday. And the concept there is if one found, we talked previously in Mishna number 9, if you found an animal that was lost, that you would have to take care of it until the owner could come and claim it. That includes feeding it. That's going to cost you a lot of money. So you could work the animal, and the money that you raised from working the animal, you could use to feed it. And if the animal couldn't pay for itself and was going to cost a lot of money to keep feeding it, more even than the animal is worth after a certain amount of time, so you could sell the animal and hold on to that money until the owner comes to claim it. So here in Mishnah number 10, we're not talking about living things. Rather, if you find a garment or a vessel or a scroll, can you use it for yourself? Basically, no, you can't use it for yourself. However, many objects are going to deteriorate if they don't, receive some kind of care. And sometimes the care that they require is sort of using them, right? Like taking out a garment and shaking it out, or a scroll and unrolling it, a garment or a vessel, wooden vessels, metal vessels. Now, you can't use it for yourself, but you could get incidental benefit, if the maintenance that the vessel requires might provide a little bit of utility for you. But that's not some kind of blanket permit that you could just use it for yourself under the rubric of, oh, but it benefits the object. It really has to primarily benefit the object. That's why a scroll that needs to be unrolled for its benefit, you could read it while it's open, but you can't study it and keep it open and have two people looking at it and, risk that some harm might come to it. Now, we pick this up on page 30a, right near the top. So our Mishnah, number 10 in chapter 2, taught that one who found a lost garment spreads it for its sake, right, for maintenance of the garment, not for your sake, right, for its sake in order to ventilate it. But one may not use it as a decoration for his own prestige, right? Maybe you're poor or middle class and you found a royal garment, right? So if you put it on yourself, people are like, whoa, what happened to him? He got rich. We should have our son marry his daughter, right? That would enhance his prestige in a major way. Can you do that? No, you can't do that. Right? So you cannot use it as a decoration for your own prestige. And a dilemma was raised before the sages. If one spreads the garment both for its sake and for his sake, then what is the law? And the Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof from the Mishnah. He spreads it for its sake. Now, this little short analysis here is a perfect, concise little sugya, a little teaching in the Gemara that is so much the kind of logical, analytical reasoning that the sages do. And this is just a perfect, concise example of that, right? So the teaching in the Mishnah was that you can spread it for its sake, but not for your sake. So the question is, well, if when you spread it for its sake, you also benefit, is that permitted? In other words, if you spread it for both its sake and your sake, and it's the same action that benefits the garment and you, then is it permitted, right? So come in here, a proof from the Mishnah. He spreads it for its sake. So the Gemara infers, for its sake, yes, he spreads it. But both for his sake and for its sake, no, he may not do so. And the Gemara objects immediately, but say that the latter clause of the Mishnah, which said, but not for his own prestige. And the Gemara infers it is for his prestige alone that he may not spread it, but for its sake, ventilating it, and for his sake, his prestige, one may well do so. If it's a combination, then it is permitted, right? Since the first said you can't do it for its, you can do it for its sake. So that means, well, but for your sake, no. The latter part of the Mishnah says, for your prestige, you may not do it. So then for your prestige, you may not do it. But if it's for your prestige and for its sake, you can, right? So since the two ends were covered, from either one, we could infer that the middle might be permitted, right? And or rather, for its sake, you can do it. For its sake and your sake, you can't. Well, for your sake, I'm sorry. Let me just read it again. Come and hear the proof from the Mishnah. He spreads it for its sake. So the Gemara infers, well, then for its sake, it's permitted. But if it's a combination of your sake and the sake of the garment, no, the combination prohibited. And the Gemara rejects this proof. But look at the latter clause of the Mishnah. You may not do it for your own prestige. So the Gemara infers it is for your own prestige that you may not do it, but for a combination of your prestige and the sake of the garment, you may do it, right? So depending on what inference you take from what is written, that combination of for its sake and your sake becomes permitted according to one inference and prohibited according to the other. So then what do we do? So the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof, not from an inference from this Mishnah, but rather from a separate Baraisa. If one finds a lost garment, he may not spread it on a bed or on a hanger for his own sake, but he may spread it on a bed or a hanger for its sake. In other words, to ventilate the garment, you may spread it on a bed or on a hanger, but not if it's just for your benefit. Now, if guests happen to visit, he may not spread it, neither on a bed nor on a hanger, and neither for his sake nor for its sake. So apparently it is prohibited to spread it for this combination of for the sake of the garment and for your sake. But the Gemara says, no, that's not what you can learn out from that. where it said that you can't spread it out to impress your guests. It is different there, as spreading it before his guests is tantamount to burning it. What? Why would I? What is it? How is it equivalent to burning this prestigious-looking garment that I might have spread out on my bed where people can see it? How is that equivalent to burning it? Answer: either due to the evil eye that will result, people will be jealous of you, and that jealousy is like casting the evil eye, and that might cause this garment, to end up being tattered or destroyed or lost or something, or due to thieves, as once the guests are aware of the valuable item in his possession, they may be tempted to steal it. So what we haven't really said is, can you spread it out, this garment, ventilating it? You can definitely do that because you have to take care of it. It's a lost item, and until the owner comes and claims it, you have to make sure that it doesn't, rot, corrode, get moths, etc. So you ventilate it. Maybe you can take incidental pleasure from the fact that it's spread out on your bed. You can't wear it, but you can enjoy having it there. But to impress your guests, no, because that could draw either the evil eye or worse, thieves. So the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from a Baraisa. If one introduced a calf into a yoke so that it would suckle, and it threshed with the cows, it remains fit for use in the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken, because the owner did not intend for it to perform labor. Right? So the threshing floor, where grain is threshed by cows walking around on it. So those cows are doing labor for you when they're walking around threshing. Now, if you bring a calf into that environment, not for the purpose of it joining the other cows and threshing, but rather so that it can suckle from its mother, and incidentally, it threshes while it's there, that's not considered labor that you force the calf to do, such that it would disqualify it from being used in certain rituals. The two rituals that we're going to talk about are the heifer whose neck is broken, and this is when a body is found, like between towns. It was murdered, but we don't have the murderer. We don't know who the killer is. And then a ritual has to be performed when this happens in Israel, that we measure which is the closest town to where the body was found. And then the elders of that town come out and they perform this ritual where a heifer's neck is broken. And the elders say, that none of us is responsible for killing this person. Why would we think that the elders of a nearby town would be responsible? Why are they the usual suspects? They're not. They're the elders. They're the respected people. But as we learned earlier in our journey through the Talmud, what they're saying is, God willing, this person didn't end up dead because, he came looking for shelter in our town and he was rejected and sent away and ended up getting killed on the road between towns. Then there's the ritual of the red heifer, right, which is sort of the archetypal chok, meaning, the supra-rational, one of the supra-rational laws of the Torah. In other words, there's no logical reason for it. We just do it because God said so. And when the temple was standing, a person who had come into contact with a dead body, either by actually, helping to bury a body or even by walking over graves in a cemetery, and has, tumas mace, ritual impurity contracted from a corpse, so they couldn't enter the temple precincts to bring sacrifices, etc., until they had been purified. And the ritual of purification for one with corpse tuma is being sprinkled with the waters that contain ashes of the red heifer. There have only been 9 red heifers in all of Jewish history. There weren't any red heifers after the second temple was destroyed, so all of those 9 red heifers occurred during the approximately 1,200 years between when the Joshua led the children of Israel into the promised land, and there were 400 years where the Mishkan was still standing, and then the first temple, and then the second temple period. So since then, there has not been a pure red heifer. And people are always on the lookout for a pure red heifer because that might indicate that Mashiach is about to come, that the third temple will be built, and that before priests can enter and serve there, they're going to need to be purified because we're actually all considered to have corpse tuma. Since, we've entered cemeteries, etc., walked over graves that were unmarked. And before anyone will be able to serve in the third temple, they'll have to be purified with ashes, with, the waters of sprinkling that contain the ashes of the red heifer. At any rate, for both the heifer whose neck is broken and the red heifer, those cows can never have been worked. They can't have been used for labor. So the question here is, if you introduced a calf onto the threshing floor for its sake, meaning so it could suckle from its mother, and while it was there, it happened to, thresh some of the grain, that's incidental, and it's not considered like you worked it, and it would remain qualified at least to be used in the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken, and we'll see about the red heifer. Okay, but the point is discussing whether something it can be used for its sake and for your sake, and what happens then. So that's the discussion here. So if a calf is introduced onto the threshing, introduced into a yoke so that it would suckle from its mother, and it threshed with the cows, it remains fit for use in the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken. Because the owner did not intend for it to perform labor. But if the owner introduces it to the yoke so that it will suckle and it will thresh, he had in mind that, it'll suckle from its mom and it will thresh for me, then it becomes disqualified for use in that ritual because his intent is for the calf to perform labor, and the intentional performance of labor disqualifies it from that ritual. And here isn't the placement of the calf in the yoke for both his sake, threshing, and for its sake, suckling. And the Baraisa teaches that the calf is unfit. So apparently, it is prohibited for one who found a lost garment to spread it for both his sake and for the garment's sake. And the Gemara rejects this proof by citing a verse written with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken. It is different there, as the verse states, Deuteronomy 21:3, the elders of that city shall take a heifer of the herd that has not been worked with and has not pulled a yoke. It has not been worked with. Syntax is going to matter here. It has not been worked with, and that word is avad, and has not pulled a yoke. Now, this indicates that the heifer is rendered unfit in any case of labor performed. Therefore, no conclusion can be drawn with regard to spreading the garment. Right? Because the particular syntax of that verse in the Torah says that if it did any work at all, whether it was in combination with its own sake, suckling, and incidental work that it did, threshing while it was suckling, or work that the owner had in mind, while it suckles, it'll thresh for me. In any case, if it did any work at all, it would become disqualified. But that's a particular wording in the Torah that teaches us that, and we don't have that kind of wording in our discussion here about a garment that it's a lost object, you found it, you have to take care of it so that it doesn't deteriorate while it's in your care until the owner comes back. And we're trying to figure out, well, if spreading it out is good for the garment and it happens to give you pleasure, does that mean you can't spread it out at all? We haven't learned out, right? We can't learn out that we don't know the answer to that from the example of the heifer whose neck is broken. So the Gemara asks, if it is so that the calf is rendered unfit by any labor that it performed, then it should be unfit even in the first clause, where the owner did not intend for the calf to perform labor. And the Gemara answers, this is comparable only to this other case, as we learned in the Mishna, Mishna Para, right, which is about the cow. If a bird rested upon a red heifer, now the red heifer used that it would be burned, it would be slaughtered and then burnt up in its entirety in view of the temple on the Mount of Olives, but in view of the Holy Temple. It would, so be slaughtered properly, then it burned entirely, and then its ashes would be gathered up, and those would be the ashes that would be mixed with the waters of sprinkling, etc. Also, with the red heifer, it can never have performed any labor, or it would be disqualified from serving as the red heifer. So a question was asked: if a bird rested upon a red heifer, does that disqualify it? It did the job of being a resting place for the bird, right? Is that considered labor? No, it remains fit for use in the purification ritual, as supporting a bird on its back is considered neither labor nor comparable to pulling a yoke. However, if the red heifer is a female cow, right? So if a male animal, right, a male cow, mounted it for mating, it is unfit for use in the purification ritual. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the difference? Why is it that if a bird rested on the red heifer, that's not considered any labor, it didn't do anything, remains fit? But if a male, if a bull mounted it for the purpose of mating with it, that would disqualify it from serving as the red heifer. In both cases, an animal was on top of it, so to speak. So what's the difference? And the difference is in accordance with the statement of Rav Papa. As Rav Papa says, with regard to the verse written concerning the heifer whose neck is broken, and the elders of that city shall take a heifer of the herd that has not been worked with and that has not pulled a yoke. So if the word were written with an additional letter vav, which would mean the passive syntax, has been worked, ubad, and we also vocalize the word in the passive voice, ubad, I would say that even if the heifer performed labor by itself, it is disqualified for use in the ritual. Like, what if it just walked onto the threshing floor because it wanted company of other cows? Nobody introduced it there. Nobody desired that the red heifer work. It ended up doing work of its own accord. Would that disqualify it? So according to this syntax, yeah, if it did any work at all, even of its own volition, not for the purpose of a human asking it to do it or leading it to do it, that might disqualify it. So if the word were written with this additional letter vav, so that it means has been worked with, ubad, and we also vocalize the word when we read the Torah aloud, ubad, I would say that even if the heifer performed labor on its own volition, it would be disqualified for use in the ritual. If the word were written without an additional letter vav, which would mean the active, avad, meaning that a person purposely used it for labor, and we also vocalize the word in the active voice, avad, I would say that indicates that the heifer was fit for use in the ritual until its owner intentionally used it for labor. But now that the word is written without the additional vav, but when we read it aloud, we vocalize it as if the additional vav was there, ubad, right? It's written. Remember that there are no vowels in a Torah scroll, and so there are traditions that teach us how to vowelize the words when we pronounce it. So in this case, it's written without the extra vav, which would mean avad, the active, but we vocalize it ubad, the passive. So in that case, so what this means that the law comes out like this: in order to render the heifer unfit, we require the situation described by the word ubad to be similar to the situation described by the word avad. So what does this mean? Just as the word avad indicates that the owner is amenable to the performance of that labor because he worked the cow, or he was, it was amenable to him that the cow be worked, even if he purposely didn't do it himself. But if he benefits from the work, then that's going to disqualify the cow. So what's the difference between a bird landing on a red heifer and a bull mounting it? If a bird lands on the red heifer, what difference does it make to the owner of the red heifer? But if a bull mounts a red heifer, well, that can benefit the owner because the cow might get pregnant and calve, right? And the calves that are born, would accrue to the owner's assets. And of course he would be amenable to that. And that's why the bull mounting the red heifer disqualifies it from use as being a red heifer, but a bird landing on it does not. Now, a new subject. The Mishnah teaches, and so did we learn out, you can't spread a garment out, to impress your guests. We know that. You can spread a garment out just to preserve it because it needs to be shaken out and aired. If the fact that you derive some pleasure while it's sitting on your bed, that's kind of incidental. It doesn't matter. That's kind of like you can, just read, you can glance in a Torah scroll that you've opened just to air it, but you can't get real benefit from it. So I think that's equivalent. The fact that you like it when it's spread on your bed is like a bird landing on it. It's not really that meaningful. But showing it off to your guests, that's like the bull mounting the heifer, and that's prohibited. So in other words, even to air it out, you can't do that if it's also going to impress your guests. Now the Mishnah teaches, in other words, you could air it out some other time for the sake of the garment. You can't air it out at the time that would impress your guests. New subject. The Mishnah teaches if one found silver vessels or copper vessels, he may use them for their own sake, and the same law applies to other vessels. So the sages taught in a Baraisa, one who finds wooden vessels uses them so that they will not deteriorate due to lack of use. If one found copper vessels, he uses them with hot water, but not directly on the fire, due to the fact that it erodes them. If one found silver vessels, he uses them with cold water, but not with hot water, because it tarnishes them. If one found rakes or axes, he may use them with soft substances, but not with hard substances, because using them with those substances damages them. If one found gold vessels or glass vessels, which do not deteriorate due to lack of use, he may not touch them until Elijah will come and identify the owner. They don't need to be aired. They don't need to be in use in order not to deteriorate. So he has to just put them away, and hopefully the owner will come and claim them. The Baraisa continues. In the manner that the sages said with regard to a lost item, so they said with regard to a deposit, right? If somebody deposited something in your care, either as an unpaid bailee or a paid bailee, what are the rules governing whether you may make personal use of it while it's in your custody? Sounds like going to be the same rules as when you're taking care of a lost item until the owner will come and claim it. Right. In the manner that the sages said with regard to a lost item, so they said with a deposit. And the Gemara asks, what is the bailee doing with a deposit? I.e., the owner should tend to his own item. Why is the bailee using it at all? And the Gemara answers, Rav Ada Bar Hama said that Rav Sheshes said it is referring to a deposit whose owner went to a country overseas. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the bailee to tend to the deposit until his return, right? Do what's necessary so the item doesn't deteriorate. The Mishnah teaches if a person found a sack or a basket or any other item that is not his typical manner to take and carry because it is beneath his dignity, he shall not take it. You don't have to pick up something that picking it up is going to, diminish your dignity. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? It is, as the sages taught in a Baraisa, it is stated with regard to the return of a lost item, you shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep wandering and disregard them. You shall return them to your brother. Now, it could have said, if you see your brother's ox or sheep wandering, you shall return it. So why does this extra language of you shall not disregard it? We know that if you're obligated to return it, you're not going to disregard it. So why are these words introduced? And this is to teach you, the Tan explains that the phrase, and disregard them, means that there are occasions when you may disregard lost items, and there are occasions when you may not disregard them. Right? It actually introduces a variable that there are times when they may be disregarded, although generally you may not. So what are the exceptions when you may disregard? One is where it's beneath the dignity of a particular person to pick up an object. Now, this is not like, yeah, that's not for me, it's smelly, right? That's not what we're talking about, your dignity. It's more like a Torah scholar who is bound to uphold the dignity of his office, or a priest, or a high priest, or a king, right? There are certain things that are beneath the dignity of the office that you hold, and you may not besmirch that office by picking up certain kinds of lost items. Not all lost items, certain kinds of lost items. How so? Under what circumstances may one disregard a lost item? One may do so, for example, in a case where he was a priest and the lost item is in the graveyard, because a Kohen is not permitted to make himself tameh by entering a graveyard except for very, very close relatives. Or where he was an elderly person and it is not in keeping with his dignity to tend to the item. Or where the value of his labor was greater than the value of the lost item of the other person, right? It can't cost you money, that you need to feed your family in order to go, pick up this lost object and return it. You're not going to become impoverished in order to return a lost object. I.e., if the finder was to return the item, reimbursing him for his lost wages would cost more than the value of the item. So, you don't have to become impoverished, but it's going to cost. But if you're giving up your wages in order to return the lost item, so then you need to be reimbursed for that. But if the owner is going to end up paying you more for your lost wages than the value of the lost item, then you should disregard the lost item. Therefore, it is stated, and disregard them, to introduce these possibilities. So the Gemara asks, for what case was a verse necessary to derive that one may disregard a lost item? If we say that the verse is necessary for the case of a priest and the lost item is in the graveyard, it is obvious that he need not return the item, as this obligation to return the lost item is a positive mitzvah, a positive commandment. You shall return them to your brother. You shall return these lost objects. And that the mitzvah involving the entry of a priest into a graveyard, this is a prohibition and a positive mitzvah. The Kohen is prohibited to become tameh, right? He shall not defile himself. A priest may not defile himself. He may not become tameh for the dead, and he has a positive mitzvah, you shall be holy. The priests are commanded to be holy, and that's included in they have to preserve themselves from becoming ritually impure. So, since a positive mitzvah, you shall return the lost object, does not come and override an action which would violate both a prohibition, a negative mitzvah, and a positive mitzvah, you shall be holy, right? The combination, prohibition, negative mitzvah and positive mitzvah, override the positive mitzvah of you shall return the lost object. And so we don't need that phrase, do not disregard, to introduce the possibility, the teaching that the priest doesn't become tameh by entering a graveyard in order to return a lost object. We didn't need to learn it out from the phrase, do not disregard. So, and furthermore, we do not override a ritual prohibition in the face of monetary matters. Even if you shall be holy wasn't there, you shall not profane yourself for the dead, a commandment, the negative commandment to the priest, we're not going to override that for the positive mitzvah, return a lost object, because a positive mitzvah in a monetary matter certainly is not going to override a negative mitzvah in ritual matters. Generally speaking, let's leave it at that. Now, the Gemara suggests, rather, say that the verse is necessary to the phrase, and do not disregard them. Rather, say that the phrase is necessary to derive the exemption from returning the lost item in a case where the value of the finder's labor was greater than the value of the lost item of the one who lost it. So the Gemara rejects this possibility. That law is derived not from the phrase, and disregard them, but rather from that which Rav Yehuda says that Rav says. As Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, it is written, quote, only so that there shall be no needy among you, end quote, in Deuteronomy 15:4. And this verse can be understood as a command indicating that it is incumbent upon each individual to ensure that he will not become needy. Therefore, your assets take precedence over the assets of other people, right? We're all obligated to tithe. Even a beggar is obligated to give away 1/10 of what he receives as charity. So we are obligated to take care of our sisters and brothers and to give tzedakah, to give charity. But we are not obligated, in fact, we are prohibited from becoming impoverished and becoming needy. Now, sometimes that just happens to people, but you have to do what you can to avoid it, right? We are obligated to not become needy. It's very interesting. So what does that mean? For example, you have to, we know that elsewhere in the Talmud it says you have to teach your son a trade, right? So that he won't grow up to be neither a beggar nor a bandit. He has to have an honest living that he has to learn, right? In the old days, there wasn't colleges and all that to go to. So the father was responsible to either teach the son his own trade or to apprentice him to someone so that he'll learn a trade. So here we learn that since already it's a general matter that you have to preserve your assets, and your assets are more important than other people in the sense that you're not going to give up wages that are worth more than the object that you're going to return, and that you would lose those wages in order to return the object. So the Gemara concludes, rather the phrase, and do not disregard them, meaning that sometimes you can disregard, this is necessary to derive the exemption from returning the lost item in the case where he was an elderly person and it is not in keeping with his dignity to tend to the item. You know, some people are just old, they have a certain dignity of elders, and they don't need to be, feeding chickens because they found a chicken and they have to take care of it until the owner comes along. Like, that's just not an appropriate occupation or activity for certain people. Now, Rabbi says, and we are on 30b, if there was a lost animal and the elderly person began the process of returning it, for example, if he struck it even once to guide it in a certain direction, like you might prod with a stick, a donkey, to make it move in a certain direction, then he is obligated to tend to it and return it. And the Gemara relates, Abaye was sitting before Rabbah and he saw these goats standing nearby. And he picked up a clod of dirt and threw it at them, causing them to move, probably to get off the street. And Rabbah said to him, you have now obligated yourself to return those goats. Arise and return them to their owner. Now this would be something beneath the dignity of a Torah scholar, but now that he took an action and started, moving the goat, even by tossing a clod of dirt at them, he now became responsible to be the finder and tend to the goats until the owner could come and claim them. A dilemma was raised before the sages in a case of a person for whom it is his typical manner to return an item of that type in the field, where there are fewer onlookers, but it is not his typical manner to return an item of that type in the city. Then what is the law? In other words, a Torah scholar who would like to do the mitzvah of returning lost objects, but returning these particular lost objects might sort of besmirch the dignity of his office. So when no one's looking, it doesn't besmirch the dignity of his office, so he can do that mitzvah. So are we going to say that he does it when there's not people looking, and he doesn't do it when there people are looking? Is that the law? Do we say that for one, to be obligated to return a lost item, we need an unequivocal obligation to return it that applies in all cases, whether people are looking or not? And since it is not his typical manner to return an item of that sort in the city, let him not be obligated to return such an item at all. Or perhaps he is obligated in any event to return the item in the field when people are not looking, and once he's obligated to return it in the field, he's also obligated in the city. Which way does the law go? And the Gemara concludes, Taiku. That question remained unresolved. Rava says, in any case where he would recover his own item and would consider it to be in keeping with his dignity, he's also obligated to return another person's item. And in any case where he unloads and loads his own animal's burden, he's also obligated to unload and load the burden of another person's animal who needs help. And the Gemara relates, Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, was walking on the road, and a certain man encountered him, and that man was carrying a burden that consisted of sticks of wood. And he set down the wood, and he was resting. And then the man said to him, right, to Rabbi Ishmael, lift the sticks for me and place them upon me. Now, it was not in keeping with the dignity of Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, to do this kind of manual labor and lifting the wood. Now, that he feels for the guy, but it's beneath the labor of the dignity of his office to load the wood. So what did Rabbi Ishmael do? He said to the man, how much are your sticks worth? And the man said to him, a half dinar. So Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, gave the man a half dinar, and he took possession of the wood, right? So now the man has sold his wood. Now, what's Rabbi Ishmael going to do with the sticks? It's beneath his dignity to lift them. He just purchased them so that he doesn't have to lift them. So he purchased them, and then he says the sticks are ownerless, and anyone who comes along can pick them up. Now he's ready to leave. But then what happens? It's quite funny. The man then reacquired the wood and said, oh, that wood is mine. And he again requested that Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, lift the wood for him. Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, again gave him a half dinar, and again took possession of the wood, and again declared the wood ownerless. And he then saw that the man desired to reacquire the sticks of wood again. This guy never had such luck. He just put down his bundle of sticks, and because he asked Rabbi Ishmael to lift them for him, and Rabbi Ishmael wouldn't do that, so Rabbi Ishmael bought the sticks for him and rendered them ownerless, and he got a half dinar, and then it happened again, he got another half dinar, and the sticks are still there. So the guy wants to reacquire them again. He says, why not repeat this as many times as he can get away with it? Hey, Rabbi Ishmael, please load the sticks on me. He's saying it for the third time. Rabbi Ishmael, is not going to keep playing this game. So what happens? So he saw that the man again desired to reacquire the sticks of wood. So Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, said to him, I declared the sticks of wood ownerless with regard to everyone else, but I did not declare them ownerless with regard to you. Right? So you can't do this again. Anyone else can come along and pick them up. I acquired them, right? Says Rabbi Ishmael, I paid for them not once but twice. So anyone can come along and pick them up, but not you. And the Gemara asks, but is property rendered ownerless in a case like this? Can you say that this property is hereby ownerless and anyone can pick it up except you? But didn't we learn in a Mishna, Tractate Peah, that Beis Shammai say property declared ownerless for the poor is thereby rendered ownerless? But Beis Hillel say it is not ownerless until the property will be ownerless for the poor and the rich alike, like produce during the sabbatical year, which is available for anybody. As the law is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, meaning that you can't say something is ownerless and then specify who is permitted to come along and pick it up. So what? So as the law is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, how could Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, declare the wood ownerless selectively, excluding the prior owner from the wood? So rather, Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, actually declared the wood ownerless to everyone without exception, and it was with a mere statement that he prevented him from reacquiring the wood, i.e., he told the man not to reacquire the wood, even though there was no legal impediment to that reacquisition. He said, look, you made out very well. You now sold it twice. We're not going to go through this again. Go on your way, and somebody else will come and pick up this wood. Not, you're not permitted to pick it up, or not, this is ownerless for everybody but you, but rather, enough. Go on your way. So the Gemara asks, but wasn't Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, an elderly person? And it was not in keeping with his dignity to tend to the item. Why did he purchase the wood and render it ownerless in order to absolve himself from the obligation to lift the burden, if he in fact had no obligation to do so in the first place because he comes under this exemption that we've been talking about, that do not disregard actually excuses certain people who, one for whom it is beneath his dignity, either as an elder or as a Torah scholar, to pick it up, and he qualified on both counts. So why did he go through all this stuff of acquiring it from him so he wouldn't have to pick it up? He didn't have to pick it up. And the Gemara answers, in the case of Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, he conducted himself beyond the letter of the law, and he could have simply refused the request for help. Now, the Gemara cites a source for going beyond the letter of the law in the performance of mitzvahs. As Rav Yosef taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse, and you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and shall show them the path wherein they shall walk, and the action that they must perform. That's Exodus 18:20, God speaking to Moses and saying, and you shall teach them, meaning the Jewish people, the statutes and the laws, and shall show them the path where they shall walk, and the action that they must perform. Seems like a very general statement. We're receiving a bunch of laws. It's from God. It's in the Torah. We are obligated to follow the mitzvahs. So what is God teaching us when he's basically saying, and all the mitzvahs that are in this book, you shall follow them, right? Why is it specified in this particular verse in that way? And the Baraisa parses the various directives in this verse that actually do teach specific things. So first, and you shall teach them. That is referring to the structure of their livelihood, i.e., teach the Jewish people trades so that they may earn a living. The path, that is referring to acts of kindness. They shall walk, that is referring to visiting the sick. Wherein, that is referring to burial, right? That if somebody has no one to bury them, the Jewish people take care of them and bury them when they die. And the action, this is referring to acting in accordance with the letter of the law that they must perform. That is referring to acting beyond the letter of the law, right? So each of these things teaches special things that we have to pay attention to in order to be a righteous nation. So the Gemara analyzes the Baraisa. The master said, with regard to the phrase, they shall walk, that is referring to visiting the sick. And the Gemara asks, well, that is a detail of acts of kindness. Why does the Baraisa list it separately? And the Gemara answers, the reference to visiting the sick is necessary only for the contemporary of the ill person. As the master said, when one who is a contemporary of an ill person visits him, he takes 1/60th of his illness. Since visiting an ill contemporary involves contracting a bit of his illness, a special derivation is necessary to teach that even so, he is required to go and visit him. Now, there's a bunch of things that were said there. To unpack that a little, first of all, it's a beautiful teaching that we have that when you go visit an ill person, you remove 1/60th of their illness from them, right? You're not going to cure them, but the visit makes it 1/60th better. Now, we haven't said before that the manner of removing 1/60th of the illness is that it comes into you. It's just that the visit removes it, not that you become slightly sick by being there. However, there is an interpretation here that what that means that when old people visit other old people, they're a little bit of a vulnerable population. So does the word contemporary in this context mean that maybe people who are old don't have to visit other people who are old? No, you are obligated. So maybe what contemporary means is not just somebody who also happens to be old, like the person who's being visited. Rather, it means somebody who has the same mazel, right? In other words, people who are ill, for whatever reason, they've been, struck down. If it happens that you were born at exactly the same time, under the same stars, as the person who is sick, well, then maybe you might want to stay away. And some opinions say you should visit even so, and others say you're excused from going. Now, it's taught in the Baraisa with regard to the phrase wherein, that in that verse 18:20, Exodus, that this is referring to burial. And the Gemara asks, well, that is also a detail of acts of kindness. That if there's somebody dies and there's no one to pay for his burial, then the community steps in and buries him. So why does the Baraisa list it separately? And the Gemara answers, the reference to burial is necessary only to teach the law of an elderly person, and it is in a circumstance where it is not in keeping with his dignity to actually perform the act of burying, right? Like if you come out across a body, out in the wilderness, and you're not capable of dragging that body, to the next town, but you have a shovel or some kind of tools available, so then you bury that person right there. But an elderly person doesn't have that obligation. Therefore, a special derivation is necessary to teach that even so, he is required to participate in the burial. So if it's going to be too taxing for him, no. But actually, there is no beneath your dignity when it comes to burying a dead person that needs burial. And in fact, even a Kohen Gadol will bury an unattended corpse, even though a Kohen Gadol is not permitted to become Tameh even for his own parents. Now, it's taught in the Baraisa that they must perform. This phrase is referring to acting beyond the letter of the law. As Rabbi Yochanan says, Jerusalem was destroyed only for the fact that they adjudicated cases on the basis of Torah law in the city. And you're like, what? Obviously they adjudicated cases according to Torah law. Why would that have resulted in Jerusalem being destroyed? Should they rather have adjudicated cases on the basis of arbitrary decisions? Rather say that they established their rulings on the basis of Torah law, but they didn't go beyond the letter of the law. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 10. Here in chapter 2. Mishnah 11. Which is the item that is considered Which is the item that is considered lost property? If one found a donkey or a cow grazing on the path, that is not lost property, as presumably the owners are nearby and they are aware of the animal's whereabouts. If one found a donkey with its accoutrement overturned, or a cow that ran through the vineyards, that is lost property. In a case where one returned the lost animal and it fled, and he again returned it and it fled, either this scenario repeats itself 4 or 5 times. He is obligated to return it each time. As it is stated, you shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep wandering and disregard them. You shall return them to your brother. Now, you can charge him for your expenses and the hassle of continually of repeatedly returning the lost animal, but you still have to return it and go to the trouble of doing it. If in the course of tending to and returning the lost item, the finder was idle from labor that would have earned him a sela, he shall not say to the owner of the item, give me a sela to compensate me for my lost income. Oh, rather, the owner gives him his wage as if he were a laborer, a payment that is considerably smaller, right? So you can't say, whoa, I am a high-powered lawyer. I make $1,000 an hour. Returning your animal cost me 3 hours. Give me $3,000. No. You get paid like a minimum wage worker when you're performing this activity. So there you see, you don't have to do it if the animal is worth less than your wage. So maybe there the lawyer, there the lawyer is not excused because it's your wage as $20 an hour, not as $1,000 an hour. So if the animal is only worth $15, okay, you don't have to return it. But if the animal, is worth $1,000, you have to go and return it, and you're only going to get $60 for your time that you spend doing it, even though you could have earned much more. Rather, the owner gives him his wage as if he were a laborer, a payment that is considerably smaller. If there are 3 men there who can convene as a court, he may stipulate before the court that he will undertake to return the item, provided that he receives full compensation for lost income. If there is no court there before whom he can stipulate his condition, his financial interests take precedence, and he need not return the lost item. He can't charge the $3,000, but he doesn't have to return the lost item. If he's going to lose that much money, he doesn't have to return it. Gemara, with regard to the question in the Mishnah, which is the item that is considered lost property? The Gemara asks, is that to say that all those other cases that we stated in this chapter are not lost property? And Rav Yehuda says that this is what the Tana of our Mishnah is saying. What is the principle employed in defining a lost item that one is obligated to return? And the Mishnah cites examples to illustrate the principle. If one found a donkey or a cow grazing in the path, that is not lost property. He's not obligated to return it. But if one found a donkey with its accoutrement overturned, or a cow that was running through vineyards, that is lost property and he is obligated. So with return to the ruling in the Mishnah that a donkey and a cow grazing on the path are not considered lost property, the Gemara asks, and is that the case even if they graze there untended forever? And Rav Yehuda said that Rav said until 3 days pass, they are not lost. After that, they are considered lost. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? If the animal is found grazing at night, even if it is untended for even 1 hour, it can be presumed to be lost, as an owner never grazes animals untended at night. If the animal is found grazing during the day, even if it is untended for more than 3 days, it is also not presumed to be lost. And the Gemara answers, no, the measure of 3 days is necessary only in a case where one saw the animal grazing in the early hours in the morning and in the dark of nightfall. For the first 3 days, we say it happened that the animal went out a bit earlier or a bit later than usual, but nevertheless, it was with the owner's knowledge. Once we observe this for more than 3 days, then we conclude it's a lost item. And this is also taught in Baraisa. If one found a cloak or an axe on a main thoroughfare or a cow running through the vineyards, that is lost property. We're on page 31a now, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. If one found a cloak alongside a fence, an axe alongside a fence, or a cow grazing among the vineyards, that is not lost property. If one sees these items for 3 consecutive days, that is not lost property. If one saw water that is flowing and coming to inundate another person's field, he must establish a barrier before the water in order to preserve the field. Rava says the verse, and so shall you do with every lost item of your brother. This serves to include an obligation to protect your brother from the loss of his land. Rav Hanania said to Rava, there is a baraisa that is taught that supports your opinion. If one saw water that is flowing and coming to flood another person's field, he must establish a barrier before the water in order to preserve the field. My brother once told me that he was away on a vacation with his family, and his home, which is on the East Coast, there was a terrible storm, and a tree came and fell and smashed a window, and his neighbor came over and boarded up the window. Beautiful. What a beautiful mitzvah. And that's this mitzvah. That's the same idea as you see that your neighbor's field is being flooded, or a door is broken and open for theft, and you go and you step in and you preserve the property of your neighbor. That is this mitzvah. So Rava said to Rav Hanania, if you are attempting to bring support for my ruling due to that baraisa, then do not support my ruling. With what are we dealing here in the baraisa? We are dealing with a field in which there are sheaves of grain on the land. And the Tana of the baraisa is referring to the preservation of the sheaves, not the land itself. And the Gemara asks, if the baraisa is referring to a field in which there are sheaves of grain, what is the purpose of stating it? Isn't it obvious that one is obligated to preserve the sheaves as he would any other lost item? No, it is necessary to state the law only in a case where there are sheaves that need the land in order to dry. Lest you say, since they still need the land, their legal status is like that of the land itself, and he is not obligated to return them. The Baraisa teaches us that the sheaves are independent of the land, and they must be preserved. So wait a minute, what are the laws here? To include the loss of land, the obligation to return another's property does include preventing loss of his land. For example, if one sees floodwaters approaching another person's field, he is obligated to erect a barrier to prevent the field from becoming flooded. So that my brother's neighbor was performing a mitzvah, not just an act of kindness. Okay. Let's check some questions and comments on Bava Metzia, Daf Lamed, page 30. Load Google Doc. Here we go. Joe, a heifer has never calved. After being bred, she may become pregnant, which would render her ineligible. Right. That's the point. Right. You can't, a red heifer has never calved. That's exactly right. And likewise, a heifer whose neck is broken. Marjorie, along with the teaching of renewal of self and of nation found in the reading in Ezekiel, I am personally fond of our cows, but they are a reminder of an old Yiddish saying, learned quite a few in my childhood. All is not butter that comes from a cow. Very good. Right? It's not only there for your benefit. There's a lot of responsibilities too, I would think is what this is saying. I wish I spoke Yiddish, so I'll try reading the Yiddish that you included in your comment, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. But als is nit puter was kunt, arois von der Kuh. People speak Yiddish. Tell me how badly I butchered it. And Guy, that has long mystified me. Are Social Security and retirement plans subjected to tithing? You know, you don't have to tithe money that you've saved up and that then you're living off. You do have to tithe interest that you're making on your money from the bank, right? Because that's income. Social Security, that's a great question. Probably you do have to tithe it because even though you've paid into the system, you know, it's now acting as income. But I don't know the answer to that. It's a really good question, and I'm sure you can Google, do I need to pay Meiser on Social Security? That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos. So Shabbos, I think, is coming in at 6:53. It's going to go out about 7:50, like 8 o'clock. I'm going to do my best to get on the air by about 8:30 Pacific time tomorrow night.